and I'm Mary Dewart, and I want to welcome you to Climate Week and to this wonderful evening with filmmaker Bob Nesson. We're featuring his film Power to the Petals, Wenzday Jane, and the Culture of Change.
My understanding of the world changed when I learned how to build things. I've really always been interested in challenges and problem solving. Everywhere you turn, there's a problem, and there's an opportunity to learn something new by solving that problem. I run this company, Metro Pedal Power. We have a fleet of vehicles, and we use the different vehicles for different jobs. I'm not just running a business. I'm making an inquiry into the nature of business, the nature of value, the nature of the economy. I want to know what we're doing and why. I'm looking to find where the balance is between self-interest and community interest. So many of the trips that are happening in the city are short, not that heavy, and easily replaced by a pedal-powered vehicle rather than a gasoline-driven vehicle.
So we take out this recycling vehicle 3 days a week and dump the individual recycling bins in it.
I think it does blow some minds when people think, wait a minute, you can move 600 pounds with your legs? Bicycling as freight transport in terms of carbon footprint and supporting local business. It's just these little subtle things that make communities a little bit better. The cutting edge of change.
I am honored to have three distinguished panelists with us tonight who are here to talk about some of the issues and also to answer your questions. I encourage you not to hold back. So on my immediate left is Mike Izzo. Mike is the operations director for Bridge, this really terrific, innovative transportation system. And then next to him in the middle, Chris Dempsey, who's on the board of Brookline's Transportation Committee, and is also a former Assistant Secretary of Transportation for the state. And finally, Peter Firth, also an old friend. Peter is a professor of civil engineering at Northeastern, and also, like everybody here, I think, a strong advocate of better streets, livable streets, and great bicycling. So let me start off with Mike. What are your thoughts about how we can lower our carbon footprint and be a community that really functions better vis-a-vis transportation?
When I think about lowering the carbon footprint, obviously in this country in the last, say, 50, 60 years, we've been more focused on accommodating cars in most cities. But a lot of communities now, not all communities, but a lot of communities have now had to kind of, change direction and focus back on making their communities more livable by through planning and zoning. So I think if communities think of how they can make those efficient modes a rational choice, I think that's a good first step towards reducing our carbon footprint.
This company, Bridge, does that?
Yes, we are trying to do that. We're trying to leverage technology to adapt the way adapt the way mass transit is delivered, to kind of bridge the gap between a more what maybe you can consider the greatest mobility choice, which is an automobile has high mobility but low efficiency, and we're trying to bridge the gap between that and the bus, which is kind of the opposite in a lot of ways.
Well, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
So, Chris, what are your thoughts about how we can achieve a lower carbon footprint and a better way of life here, perhaps?
I think I would build on Mike's comments with sort of three key ideas for how we can become a lower carbon town and society in general. I think it would be based on these three words. The first is easy, make a low carbon lifestyle easy. Second is to make it the default. And the third is to make it a delight. So the first, let's make it easy. I think we can look at an example like Zipcar, which has made it very easy to be a person who lives in Brookline or a community like Brookline and to not own an automobile. There are lots of trips that those of us who don't own automobiles need to take and want to take with a car at times. But Zipcar makes that possible and makes that easy without having to own a car. I would also maybe somewhat more controversially put a service like Uber in that category. I think Uber makes point-to-point trips that one would want a car for very easy. And I think that's very important, and I think services like that will help make us lower carbon. The second is make it default. And I think that's default both for users and also the default for governments. So there's been an encouraging change and effort in Eastern Massachusetts to make complete streets the default. So as you design streets, you think about them not just for automobiles, but also for pedestrians and for bicycles, and you think about the entire street and all the different types of uses that you might need. Another example of that I think we do somewhat poorly in Brookline at the moment is our default zoning code requires 2 automobiles per new unit of housing. Now, making that the default not only discourages the production of more housing like the one that I live in, but it also, I think, encourages more automobile usage and more automobile ownership in Brookline, when we don't necessarily need that in a town that is fortunate to be transit rich and also to have services like Uber and Zipcar available. And then finally, it's important to make low carbon living a delight, and I think this touches on what Mike was saying. The experiences that we create as a community can be low carbon and can be enjoyable. And in fact, often the most enjoyable experiences are the ones that are low carbon. You can think about Olmsted's parks and walking through one of Olmsted's parks or landscapes. Those are a delight to walk through. And their original intention was to do it to experience that park in a low carbon way. So we can very much do that. I would also put Bridge in that category. You know, on the Brookline Transportation Board, we heard as we were looking at providing Bridge with an annual license, we heard from some customers, and they talked about the service with delight. They said that it has made their commute a more enjoyable experience. It made it an easier experience. It has made it one that they almost look forward to every day, which they didn't before they had Bridge. So I think thinking about those 3 words, easy, default, and delight, we can accomplish a lot.
I would add just a thought that there are some other key words: connectivity, convenience, and cost. That's a mantra that we have for public transportation. And before I turn this over to Peter, I just wanted to say that we in Somerville have been fighting for a Green Line extension, which I grew up in Brookline and I took for granted that we always had a trolley car 5 minutes from the house. Not so in many other cities. And so getting that good transportation matrix in place is critically important. So with that, Peter, what are your thoughts?
What Wenzday said she wanted to do was explore the limits of what you can do with a bike. She understood, I can't haul everything with a bike. There are limits. And because she, for whatever reason, decided to concentrate on the freight market, you know, there were limits to, so she found a niche with trash pickup, and she found a niche with community agriculture delivery. I work in transportation planning, transportation engineering. I think just a lot more about personal transportation, not freight. And again, there are limits. Most people won't ride bikes 20 miles. There are limits to how far we'll go. There are limits to how steep a hill we'll climb. And those limits are really achievable. The limits on distance, well, it's about 4 or 5 miles for most people. And did you know that in America, I'm not talking about in Europe, in America, more than 50% of the trips we make are 4 miles or less? Most of us live in cities where things are relatively flat. We don't have to climb super steep hills. And so what is keeping us from treating a bicycle like Wenzday did? It's not a toy, not just a device for exercise, though you do get good exercise, but it's a normal way of, you know, things that you have to do. I can do it with a bike. So transportation that we have to do. We have to get to school, we have to get to our shopping, we have to get to our work, we have to get to this, we have to take the kids here, we have to do that. What are the limits? Is it possible to do it on a bike? If you haven't had the chance, I urge you, if you can, go visit the Netherlands or go visit Copenhagen. Because these are places where they have said collectively, let's explore the limits of what we can do with a bike. They can't do everything with a bike. They have cars, they have trains, they have buses. But what they can do with a bike is every kid in middle school and high school can get to school with a bike. Could we do that in Brookline? And our distances are small. From South Brookline to Brookline High School, it's, I don't know, 2 miles, 2.5 at most. And in Boston likewise, and we could do so much. They're making 26% of their trips by bicycle. Public transportation has a great role. I mean, I love the Green Line extension. I love services like Bridge, but public transportation means you concentrate a lot of people on the same trajectory, and a lot of our trips do concentrate like that. But we also take a lot of diffuse trips that go all over the place. You're never going to have good public transportation for that. And do we want the only alternative to be you drive your own private car or take Uber? No, we want also to have the human-powered, no-carbon opportunity like riding a bike.
Shall I open it up to the audience? Do people have questions? And speak up, please. Up there, could we turn on the audience lights, please, because it's so dark? Okay. Yes, over here.
Hi, I've never heard of Bridge before tonight. Can you tell me what it is?
Absolutely. So Bridge, we're a startup. We're a small company where we consider ourselves both a technology and a transportation company. I'll tell you a bit about what our company does now. I'll tell you about how we started. Our founder, Matt George, started a company a couple of years ago out of his college dorm room. He was a student up at Middlebury College, and the campus had few options for students to get home before and after college breaks. So he chartered a bus and found a destination where a lot of students were going to from campus. Chartered a bus, sold tickets, and got kids a ride close to where they lived. Told their parents where to get them. They picked them up, and then after the break, they picked them up at the same spot and brought them back. At this point, that company is at 18 college campuses between Vermont and Texas. Now, Matt thought that idea, that kind of aggregating demand, would also work in a city very rapidly. So that's what Bridge aims to do, something very similar. So we take information that people give us. They tell us where they are. We figure out where people near them are and where they all want to go. And if we have a critical mass between the origin and destination, we'll say, all right, everyone walk a few blocks to this point, and a bus will be there at this time, and it'll take you to within a few blocks of your destination. That's the basic concept of Bridge. And currently, we've been running We've been running here in Brookline since June, and the town has been so very supportive of us, and we're really appreciative of letting us kind of start here and you know, provide our service here, and we've been, you know, testing a few things out, and we have gotten a very positive response from the community, and that's great. So our current service offerings are between Brookline and Kendall Square, Alston and Brookline, Alston, Coolidge Corner into Kendall Square, Alston, Coolidge Corner into downtown and the Seaport, and we also run service from Southie into the Seaport and downtown. And you know, our service is ever evolving, and it's, you know, it'll grow more dynamic as we go and build more customers. But it's that's where we are right now. We operate 13 passenger vans that have an automatically opening and closing door to make it easier for people to get on and off. So they're a multi-passenger vehicle, but they're also small enough to, you know, be able to maneuver in the tight streets of Boston.
Government transportation system taking over independently operated lines is typical across the country. For example, there's a book called Streetcar Suburbs that describes how our suburbs grew and how that transportation system grew up with it. In Los Angeles, there was a very complete trolley system consisting of independently owned lines, which was actually bought up by General Motors and Firestone Tire and Rubber and a few others, and then demolished to make way for buses which used rubber tires by Firestone, and one of the other companies was Esso, or at the time I think, and of course burned fuel. So that's a great comment that you made about where we are at and what the potential is today.
The most important thing is to focus on low stress bikeways. For historic reasons that I won't go into now, America and countries in Europe like Holland and Denmark, Sweden, so on, diverged around 1960. And the American direction was integrate bikes with traffic. So have bike lanes so bikes are in the street, or even no bike lanes. Things like now we have sharrows, maybe you know what those are. We put bike stencils on the street and we say, you know, bikes integrate with traffic. The European way was separate bikes from traffic, because they still had a legacy of kids riding to school, and they wanted their kids to keep riding to school. They didn't want, you know, they came later to motorization than we did. And around when they were getting super motorized, there was a big oil crisis, there was the Club of Rome report, the environmental movement. They said, we don't want to lose our bikes, like America basically lost its bikes, like England lost its bikes 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. But the key is, like I said, low stress bicycling. When you start talking about bike lanes on a busy road, people will think that, oh, I don't know, that's the bike lobby. Those bike enthusiasts want this. That's nothing I'd ever ride in. Because being in traffic when you're vulnerable, when it's just, you know, your skin, and then there's these 2,000-pound pieces of metal going by that could kill you with one little trip. There are some adrenaline-loving, mostly males, who will go for that. But you want the general population, you've got to say separate bike paths, low-stress routes on quiet streets. That's the way to go. And I've been at the forefront of trying to get the American way back to being the European way. And people love it. I mean, it just rings true with everybody. So it's now starting to come. But one of the reasons that we went with the American way of integrate bikes with traffic was because it was dirt cheap. All you had to do was paint a line and turn the grates on the drains, so instead of being parallel to a bicycle wheel, they're this way. Oh, sure, we'll do that for you. DPW directors didn't mind doing that for bikes. But when you start saying, you know, the traditional way of thinking of roads is there's a sidewalk, a place for walking, and a place for driving. And now, you know what, we really need a third place. We need a place for bicycling. That's what Copenhagen's full of. That's what all these Dutch cities are full of. It's going to cost more. It takes deliberate thinking. But that's bicycling for you and you and you and you and you. That's not bicycling for just some, the bicycling club, the select adrenaline junkies. That's bicycling for our children. That's bicycling for the mothers. That's what we need.
What about the regulatory environment? What does that have to do with the layout of our streets? Are there constraints, in other words, against putting in bike lanes, separated bike lanes, or are there constraints against putting in bike parking facilities versus automobile parking facilities?
So I don't think I've seen as many regulatory barriers, but my experience both at Mass DOT and here in Brookline have been more institutional barriers. And I think there is still a sense that from engineers, which we call still traffic engineers, by which we mean automobile traffic engineers, that their job is to move vehicles through space as quickly as possible, rather than moving people through space as quickly as possible or as efficiently as possible. And that is not to single out, any individual member of the Brookline staff or DOT staff, but I do think that there is still something of a culture, and I'm hoping that, I think it is changing a little bit, but that the engineering schools, traffic engineering schools are still teaching sort of how do you efficiently move vehicles. And so we need to start to change that mindset somewhat so that people understand and engineers understand that it's not the only goal. Often at the Brookline Transportation Board, when we see plans for a street, they're already at the 80% design stage, or they're already sort of all baked and we can make some changes around the edges. And it's somewhat too late to really have a meaningful impact. So we are very reliant on our engineers to think about these questions from the start, rather than to wait until it gets to the Transportation Board.
How practically can we make a business similar to what Wenzday Jane is doing, or if not pedal powered, but motor powered? I think it touches on zoning a bit, and how communities allot space for businesses like that. And if we're talking about a business that's going to be doing short distance deliveries with small packages, they're not going to be traveling along. They're not going to be traveling very far. They're probably going to need space in which to operate within the town or nearby. So I know a lot of communities are transitioning some of their, say, industrial or commercial land into residential. But I think for something like that to occur, a community needs to preserve, some of those. I saw a presentation recently regarding Union Square in Somerville, and it was about gritty spaces. And I think if towns are, want to do that and allow small businesses to flourish, that replace those functions of the large trucks that are driving from, 60 miles away. I think they need to really think about preserving those gritty spaces close in.
Actually, can I jump on that? I happen to live very close to Union Square in Somerville, which is very gritty. And Wenzday, the shop where Wenzday operates out of is right there in Union Square, Somerville, or it's just on the periphery, actually. And right now, because of the Green Line extension, the property values in this very gritty neighborhood are skyrocketing. She has 6,000 square feet, and she's paying a ridiculously low fee for that rental space, but the building was just sold for $3 million. And the new owner will not extend her lease. So she's got to look for another gritty space. Well, it turns out that there is at least the beginning of a solution to her problem and those same challenges here in Brookline, which is that the city of Somerville has created an innovation district with some funding to help out the innovation metric of our town. We have a place called Artisans Asylum, where robotics are built and sculptures are made and so forth. It's dirt cheap because there's a bit of support to take the bite out of rentals. And so it's interesting how one thing leads to another because we have this innovation district, because the rents are cheap, because we have the availability of this old gritty space. More people are coming and creating a momentum that is truly building around these innovative ideas. So that is something that Brookline can do. There probably aren't, at least in this Coolidge Corner area that I know of, an equivalent venue of gritty old industrial spaces, but that's something that we could find. I know that there are garages around here, right around the corner on Pleasant Street, that perhaps would be a good, really suitable kind of place for that.
In the countries that have well-developed public transportation and bicycling networks, such as the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, tons of people ride their bikes. I mean, in Holland, 40% of the people who ride trains, and trains there is just about commuter rail because the country is so small, so it's just commuter rail. 40% of people arrive by bike. And 12%, when they get off, they've got a bike waiting for them that they left overnight. They just rent the spot overnight, or if it's a cheap bike, they just leave it parked in a public space overnight. And then they ride their bike the rest of the way. And that combination of bike plus public transportation makes it possible to make very long distance trips fast. A lot of times competitive with the car because the trains don't have any congestion. They're going 70, 80 miles an hour. These are not so-called high-speed trains. They just go fast, that's all. They're just normal trains going at a normal fast speed. And I'll say, because I know what it's like where it's successful, the successful model we should be looking for is not one in which everybody brings their bike on the train. Because, I mean, running trains are expensive, and if we have to take half the space up by bikes, that's going to be difficult. I mean, you can always take a folding bike. That's nice. But where it's successful, it's with two bikes. You got one bike at the home end, and you just keep another bike, so there's safe parking. You keep another bike at the destination end. And for occasional destinations, you got bike share at the destination end.
That's what Hubway is all about.
Except, yeah, although the Dutch model is a little bit different because with Hubway, you're expected to pick up a bike at a station and drop it off within 30 minutes at another station. The Dutch model is you pick up a bike, it's yours all day, you bring it back at the end of the day. So you can go to some place that doesn't have a Hubway station. But anyhow, that's the idea behind bike share. Yeah.
Well, there's this film, Power to the Pedals, has had its premiere at the Boston Society of Architects back, I guess it was in July, I guess. And we had support from Bikes Not Bombs and Boston. We had support from Hubway. I'm sorry?
Boston Cyclist Union?
The Boston Cyclist Union and Mass Bike, yeah. They all supported this. We had a special screening at Bikes Not Bombs where we had a panel discussion about the use of bikes as vehicles for improving your lives. So for example, Bikes Not Bombs caters to young kids in the neighborhood who come to Bikes Not Bombs to learn about how to maintain or rebuild a bicycle. And once they learn, these are kids like teenagers or young teenagers, once they learn, they own the bike. Bikes Not Bombs collects old discarded bikes from the streets, they rebuild them, and many of the kids in the neighborhoods do that work, and they then send those bikes around the world to villages in Africa or Central America where the bikes provide critical transportation. And now, some of the same kids who've learned how to maintain bikes go with the bikes to those foreign locations and train the locals. It's an amazing story. So the film is used in places like that to engage and activate the local community. It's been very well received. That woman's name is Randy Mail. She's the recycling director for the city of Cambridge. She moved here from Manhattan. She had never owned a car, and she was looking for alternatives to the trucks. But what was critical was, exactly as you said, the economics. Did the economics work? Could she be guaranteed that the city of Cambridge could depend on bike transportation? They did a test run in the summer where Wenzday got the contract, and they proved that the cost for human-powered transportation, that is the cost of sending a few riders out every day to collect the public area recycling, was a tenth of the cost to doing the same thing with trucks. They reduce traffic congestion. You know, a truck has to double park in order to get access to the recycling bins in public areas, like Central Square, for example.
Yeah.
With bikes, the bike can actually pull right up onto the sidewalk and not block traffic. The cost of one of Wenzday's vehicles is in the low thousands, like $3,000, $4,000 for the complete thing, as opposed to, as Randy pointed out, $200,000, $250,000 for a truck, fuel, maintenance, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So the economic proof is right there. I saw.
First, I will call out by name Todd Corain, who's the town's transportation administrator, who does a very good job, I think, of balancing some of these issues. And in particular, in relation to Bridge, when Bridge approached Todd to look for a temporary permit to start this service, Todd's instinct was to say, let's do it. Rather than wait to come to the board to get approval, which could have been a multi-month process, which could have, you know, made Bridge think, you know what, we're not going to do Brookline, it's going to take too long, we'll start it in Cambridge, we'll start it somewhere else. So I think we have some good folks in town here that really do think about these issues. The second, on the point about economics and the point about Randy Mail in Cambridge, one interesting thing she noted there is that you know, you can do this service for cheaper than the cost of providing it by truck, but also purchasing the truck. And one of the important things that that brings to light that governments often struggle with is very often we sort of bucket our dollars between operating dollars and capital dollars. And the truck is going to be in the capital budget, and the provision of the service to clear out the bins is going to be in the operating budget. And sometimes someone like Randy may actually be forced to choose the service that has the lower operating cost, even if it requires more cost on the capital side. Because we think of them as separate budgets, we can't think of that cost holistically. So we need to be thinking about all of the costs, not just the very specific costs related to the service, but what other costs does the town or do individuals incur by being required to make certain choices or by choosing one option over the other.
I'd like to make a comment relative to what Andy just said and relative to these snowstorms. Did any of you see some traffic jams today and yesterday? You know, maybe you were in some and then you saw some on television. They're unbelievable. You know, the reason that they're happening, I mean, you could say, oh, it's because snow and there's capacity. Yeah, that's true. But the other side, it's an equilibrium. The other side is too many people are driving for what the road can handle. And when you go out in a car on a day like this, you are imposing, your being there is adding to this driver's delay, you're adding like 4 or 6 hours to other people's delay. And, you know, unless it's worth at least $20 to you, you're hurting other people $20. Unless it's worth $20 to you, you shouldn't be going out. And we only have one way of testing whether it's worth $20 to you, and that's charge you $20 and see if you pay it.
Well,
So
there's the gas tax.
we are paying so far less for driving than what we should. Why is bicycling dangerous? It's because of the cars. Okay, it shouldn't be the bicyclists that have to pay for our bike paths. We're happy to ride in the roads if only they were safe. It's the cars that make them not safe because drivers want to go 30 and 40 miles an hour. And, you know, I don't blame them. If I was driving, when I'm driving, I like to go at a good speed. But when you do that and you get that benefit, you should at the same time pay for the cost of sidewalks so it's safe for people to walk and bike paths so it's safe for people to ride. And the same thing with transit. All those people who are out there driving are slowing down the buses so much. They're killing public transportation, and they should pay for it. I mean, that's fair. That's the American way. You hurt somebody, you pay to compensate for it.
What we're looking at is the tragedy of the commons.
That's right.
Essentially. So let's wrap it up. Any final word, Chris, Mike?
I didn't get this in at the beginning, but I'd really like to thank you for having me this evening.
Yeah, a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And thank you in the audience for making this a really successful and vibrant conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.